He slid the divorce papers across the table like he was tipping a valet. Didn't even look up from his phone. Just pushed them toward me with 2 fingers and said, "Sign it, Vivian. You've always been a charity case. Now I'm just making it official." I stared at him. At the man I had loved for 6 years. At the man who had no idea that the woman he was dismissing as a financial burden was the sole heir to a $3 trillion private empire. One that owned the very corporation funding his entire career. I didn't pick up the pen. I smiled. And I said, "All right, John, let's talk about what's really about to happen." Before we dive into this incredible story, let me tell you why I do this. Every week, I bring you real stories about real people facing moments that change everything. Moments of betrayal, triumph, justice, and transformation. These aren't just stories for entertainment. They're mirrors that reflect our own relationships, our own choices, the quiet compromises we make, and the courage it takes to stop making them. I tell these stories because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that they're not alone in their struggle, that choosing yourself isn't selfish, and that truth always finds its way to the surface. These stories matter because your story matters. Now, before I go any further, I want to speak directly to you. You are watching this video right now, which means you found something worth your time. But here's what I've noticed. Most people who watch my videos never subscribe. Most of you are sitting in Atlanta, or Houston, or London, or Lagos, or right there in your bedroom in California. Watching story after story, and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet. I'm not going to beg you. I'm going to do something better. I'm going to trust your intelligence. You already know a good thing when you see it. You're still here, so join the community. Hit subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Texas, Georgia, Australia, Manchester, Netherlands, wherever you are. Let me see you. Now let's get into this story. My name is Vivian Devereaux Cole, and I grew up believing I was ordinary. My mother, Celestine Devereaux, raised me in a modest 3-bedroom house in East Atlanta. She drove a 2003 Honda Accord that made a sound like it was clearing its throat every time she started it. She packed my lunch. She worked double shifts at a hospital. She told me to study hard, love deeply, and never let anyone make you feel like a burden. She bought my prom dress from a consignment shop on Covington Highway and altered it herself at the kitchen table the night before. She never talked about status or legacy or generational wealth. She talked about integrity. She talked about kindness. She talked about God and grits and showing up. She never once mentioned that her father, my grandfather, Augustus Devereaux, was the founder and sole owner of Devereaux Global Holdings, a private financial conglomerate valued, at last count, at just over $3 trillion. She kept it from me on purpose. She told me so herself, the morning before she passed. She sat up in that hospital bed, took my hand in both of hers, and said, "Baby, I kept you away from that world because I wanted you to know who you were first. Before the money could tell you." I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not then. I was 31 years old when she died. I had been married to John Cole for 3 years at that point. We'd met at a fundraising gala. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who filled a room without trying. He was a senior vice president at Meridian Capital Group, a high-powered financial advisory firm based in Midtown Atlanta. He wore custom-tailored suits and carried himself like someone who'd read too many self-help books about alpha behavior. He was handsome, and I, a mid-level marketing strategist at a boutique brand agency, thought I was lucky. Looking back, the warning signs were always there. The small ones you file away and choose not to examine too closely. The way he introduced me at corporate events as my wife, Vivian, never my brilliant wife Vivian, or Vivian who runs accounts for half the luxury brands in the Southeast. Just my wife. A decoration, an accessory. The way he'd casually mention how much his year-end bonus was, while never once asking about my salary, as if the comparison would have embarrassed us both. And the way he talked about wealth, not as something earned, but as something that separated people into categories, the worthy and the unworthy. After Mama died, I fell apart quietly. I took bereavement leave and barely left the house for 2 weeks. John came home every night, kissed my cheek, asked if I'd eaten, and then disappeared into his home office to work. He was not cruel about it. He was simply indifferent. And somehow, indifference hurts in a particular way that cruelty doesn't. He in cruelty at least acknowledges you exist. 3 weeks after the funeral, a man named Mr. Beaumont Osei appeared at my front door. He was in his early 60s, dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit, silver at his temples, calm eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He introduced himself as the chief legal counsel for Devereaux Global Holdings and asked if he could speak with me privately. I thought it was a mistake at first. I told him I didn't know anything about any holdings. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter written in my grandfather's hand. A man I had met exactly twice as a child and who had always seemed more like a myth than a person. The letter read, "Vivian Celestine Devereaux, you are the last living heir of everything I built. I designed it this way deliberately. Your mother understood. I hope, by the time you read this, that life has made you strong enough to carry it. Welcome home." Mr. Osei sat with me for 4 hours that afternoon. He walked me through the trust structure, the subsidiary corporations, the board composition, the succession plan my grandfather had quietly architected over 40 years. By the time he left, I had a folder 3 inches thick on my kitchen counter and a head that felt like it had been turned inside out. I did not tell John. Not that night, not that week. Something in me, some quiet, watchful instinct, said, "Wait. Watch. See who he is when he doesn't know what you're worth." And what I saw over the following months made my chest tighten in a way I will never fully be able to describe. John had started working more closely with Meridian Capital's top-tier client portfolio. I knew the name of his biggest account because he mentioned it constantly at dinner, Devereaux Global's North American advisory arm. He didn't know I was connected to it. He didn't even know the name Devereaux had anything to do with me. To him, Devereaux Global was simply the most prestigious account of his career, a golden ticket. And he rode that ticket with the kind of arrogance that only men who believe they've earned everything through pure merit ever manage to perform convincingly. The change in him was subtle but unmistakable. The more his professional status rose, the smaller he seemed to want me to stay. He stopped asking about my work. He started making comments, gentle at first, then not so gentle, about how I should lean into the domestic side now that he was earning well. He suggested I quit my job and enjoy the lifestyle. When I declined, he didn't argue. He just got quiet in a way that felt like contempt, wearing patience as a costume. He began attending his firm's high-net-worth client events without inviting me. He began introducing me as my wife to people who had known us both for years, as though reminding himself, and them, of what category I belonged to. Once, at a rooftop dinner in Buckhead, I overheard him tell a colleague that Vivian is the grounded one in our marriage, the way a man might describe a sensible but unremarkable piece of furniture. I went home that night and sat in the bathtub for 45 minutes in silence. Then, one Thursday evening in November, I came home from a late client meeting to find him at the dining room table. There was a glass of expensive scotch in his hand and a manila envelope in the center of the table. He looked up when I walked in, and his expression was the strangest mix of relief and dismissiveness I had ever seen on a human face. "Vivian," he said, "sit down." I put down my bag. I sat. He opened the envelope and slid a document across the table toward me. Clean white paper, official legal headers. The words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage" at the top. "I've had the paperwork drawn up," he said, almost casually. "I think we both know this has run its course." I looked at the papers. I looked at him. "Where is this coming from, John?" He exhaled, swirling his scotch like a man with nowhere important to be. "You're a good person, Vivian, but let's be real. You've been treading water your whole life. I've outgrown this. My career is at a level now where the people around me need to match that energy. You don't." He paused. Let it land. "You've always been a charity case, if I'm being honest. I should have seen it earlier. Now I'm just making it official." The room was very still. I looked at the diamond ring on my left hand. I thought about my mother, working double shifts, packing my lunches, telling me never to let anyone make me feel like a burden. I thought about Mr. Osei, sitting at this same kitchen table, sliding me a different kind of document entirely. And I felt something happen inside me that I can only describe as a door closing very quietly, but with absolute certainty. I looked at John Cole, and I smiled. "All right," I said softly. "Let's talk about what's really about to happen." He mistook my smile for surrender. That was the thing about John. See, he had spent so many years believing that confidence was something only certain people were permitted to wear, and he had never, not once in 6 years of marriage, seen me wear it at full volume. So when I smiled at him across that table, he assumed I was performing graciousness in the face of rejection. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied, the way men do when they believe a difficult conversation has gone better than expected. "I'm glad you're being reasonable," he said. I folded my hands on the table. "Tell me something, John. How's the Devereaux account going?" He blinked just slightly. "It's going well. Why?" "Is it your most valuable client right now?" He set down his scotch. "It's the firm's largest account, yes." "Where are you going with this?" "And your firm's partnership track. You're up for senior partner next quarter, right? The promotion you've been working toward for 4 years?" He frowned. "Vivian, what does any of this have to do with—" "Everything," I said. "It has everything to do with this." I stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen counter, and picked up the leather portfolio I had carried home from my last meeting with Mr. Osei. I came back to the table and set it down between us. I opened it to the first page, the organizational chart of Devereaux Global Holdings, showing the full ownership cascade, ending in a single name at the very top. Vivian Celestine Devereaux Cole. He stared at it. The color shifted in his face like weather changing. "My grandfather was Augustus Devereaux," I said, keeping my voice even. "He founded Devereaux Global 43 years ago. My mother was his only child, and she kept her distance from the empire by choice. When she died, the succession transferred entirely to me. I have been the controlling heir of Devereaux Global Holdings for the past 7 months." John's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Your firm, Meridian Capital," I continued, "operates under a financial advisory contract that is renewed annually at the discretion of Devereaux Global's executive committee. I now chair that committee." I paused. "The renewal meeting is scheduled for next Friday." He stood up. "Vivian." "Sit down," I said. Not loudly, not with anger. Just clearly. He sat. "I'm not telling you this to threaten you," I said. "I want you to understand me. You sat there and called me a charity case. You said you outgrew me. You said the people around you need to match your energy." I let the words sit between us like objects on the table. "You are speaking to a woman who controls more private wealth than the GDP of most countries you've traveled to on business class tickets paid for by the firm, whose most important client is me." John Cole looked at me the way people look when the floor has dropped out beneath them and they're still calculating whether they're falling. "I didn't know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you didn't," I replied. "That's why I'm telling you now. Because you deserve to understand exactly what you were looking at all these years while you were deciding I wasn't enough." He leaned forward, voice shifting quickly into something softer, more urgent. "Vivian, baby, I was wrong. I made a mistake. We can rip up the papers. We can start over. Whatever you need." "John." I closed the portfolio gently. 6 years. I cooked in this kitchen. I showed up to every firm dinner. I smiled at your colleagues and your partners, and I never once asked you to acknowledge what I brought to this marriage other than being your wife. I was happy to be your wife. That was enough for me." I took a breath. "But it wasn't enough for you. And that's not something you fix with a conversation, once the money becomes visible. His jaw tightened. So what? You're going to use your inheritance to destroy me? I shook my head slowly. I'm not going to do anything to you, John. You've done everything to yourself. The divorce papers are already yours. I'll sign them. My attorneys will handle the settlement. And because I protected my inheritance under an irrevocable trust structured before our marriage, as Mr. Osi will explain to your lawyers, you won't be touching a cent of Devereaux money. What we built together in this marriage, the joint accounts, the condo, the shared assets, that gets divided equitably. Nothing more. He looked sick. As for Meridian Capital, I said, standing and picking up my portfolio, the account renewal will be evaluated on merit, same as always. The committee makes decisions based on performance and alignment. You personally have nothing to worry about unless your work doesn't hold up. I paused at the door of the dining room, turned back. But I'd encourage you to reflect on the way you've been conducting yourself, John, in business and in life. Because the version of you that sat here tonight and called his wife a charity case, that version has no future worth having. I walked down the hallway. He didn't follow. I know I sat on the edge of the bed in our room. My room, I was already thinking of it that way. And I let the silence settle around me. It was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of a decision made and standing firm. I thought of my mother again. Of the morning she told me she kept me away from the wealth so I could know who I was first. I finally understood, because the woman who had just sat at that table and spoken those words without raising her voice, without crumbling, without begging, that was not a woman who needed money to know her own worth. That was a woman who had built her worth the long way, the real way, and no one could take that. 3 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. The settlement was handled cleanly and professionally by both sets of attorneys. While John kept his position at Meridian Capital, the renewal passed because the work was sound, and I was not my grandfather's heir in order to settle personal scores. But word traveled the way word does in Atlanta's financial circles. People talk, and within a month, John Cole had become the man known in every boardroom in Midtown as the VP, who handed divorce papers to the heir of Devereaux Global while calling her a charity case. The story didn't need me to tell it. It told itself. I moved into the Devereaux private estate in Buckhead, a property I hadn't even visited until Mr. Osi handed me the keys on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in the driveway of a house with 12 bedrooms and a garden my grandmother had designed herself. I walked through it slowly, room by room, running my fingers along the walls, I standing in my grandfather's library, surrounded by 40 years of the thinking and building that had created something I was now trusted to carry forward. I wasn't sad. I want to be clear about that. I was something else entirely. I was awake in a way I had never been before, as if every ordinary morning I had ever lived, packing my own lunch, driving to work, showing up small, making myself manageable, had been preparation for this particular kind of standing tall. I still go to bed early. I still prefer a good sweet potato pie over a 3-course tasting menu. I still call my best friend Tamara Washington every Sunday from wherever I am in the world to talk about absolutely nothing important. I still drive myself to the grocery store on Saturday mornings instead of sending a personal assistant. See, because there is something grounding about choosing your own produce, carrying your own bags, standing in a checkout line like a human being with a list and a budget, and a life that is genuinely yours. Those things don't change. Money doesn't change what you love. It only removes the obstacles between you and what you already are. I learned that from my mother. The woman who drove a tired Honda and sewed prom dresses at midnight was the richest person I have ever known, measured in the only currency that matters: the ability to look at yourself clearly and be at peace with the reflection. What I know now, standing on the other side of the hardest year of my life, is this: the people who underestimate you are never really seeing you. They are seeing the edges of you, the parts you've kept small to make space for their comfort. When the full picture finally comes into view, they call it a surprise. But it was never a surprise. It was always just you. Waiting to be ready, I was always the heiress. I just needed to know myself first. And now I do. Completely. Unapologetically. Without asterisk or condition. I am Vivian Celestine Devereaux Cole, daughter of Celestine, granddaughter of Augustus, and I carry every ordinary Tuesday and every double shift and every prom dress stitched at midnight into the rooms where trillion-dollar decisions are made. I carry my mother with me into every boardroom, every negotiation, every moment where someone looks at me and tries to calculate my worth from the outside in. And I let them look, because what they see now is exactly what was always there. They just weren't paying attention. There is a kind of quiet power that the world consistently fails to recognize, not because it is hidden, but because it refuses to announce itself prematurely. Vivian's story carries within it a truth that many of us have lived in smaller, less dramatic versions of our own lives. The people who dismiss you most confidently are often the ones with the least information about who you actually are. John Cole did not fail because he was a bad man in the cartoonish sense of the word. He failed because he allowed the metrics of external success, titles, salaries, status, the approval of people in expensive rooms, to become the only lens through which he measured human worth. He looked at his wife every day for 6 years and calculated her value based on her visible output, not her depth. That is a failure of imagination as much as it is a failure of love. The lesson for all of us is this: be very careful about the stories you tell yourself about the people around you. The colleague you overlook, the partner you underestimate, the friend you quietly categorize as beneath your ambitions. You do not have the full picture. You never have the full picture. And in the moment you act on that incomplete picture with cruelty or dismissal, you are not just revealing how you see them, you are revealing the ceiling of your own understanding. But there is an equally important lesson in Vivian's side of this story, and it speaks directly to those of you who have spent years making yourself smaller in spaces where you were made to feel like an outsider. Vivian did not need her inheritance to have value. She had value before she ever opened that envelope. The dignity she showed in that dining room, the clarity with which she spoke, the refusal to weaponize her power for revenge, none of that came from wealth. That came from a mother who loved her well, and from years of living honestly, even when honesty was not rewarded. Wealth is a tool. Character is the foundation. When you build character first, wealth becomes an extension of who you already are, rather than a substitute for the self you never developed. The other lesson is for those who lead with pride over presence, with status over substance. The universe has a remarkable accounting system. What you pour into others, what you withhold, what you mock, what you celebrate, it is all being recorded, not by some external judge, but by the quality of the life you are constructing, to day by day, choice by choice. John Cole built a career on his terms, while quietly draining the confidence of the woman beside him, and when the truth arrived, it did not come as punishment. It came as clarity. A mirror. This is who you chose to be. Finally, this story speaks to legacy and generational wealth, not just the financial kind, but the spiritual kind, the kind passed through example and sacrifice. Augustus Devereaux did not simply leave his granddaughter money. He left her a long, patient lesson in the value of knowing yourself before the world tells you what you're worth. That is the most generous inheritance any parent or grandparent can offer a child, not the shortcut to ease, but the slow road to self-knowledge. Your worth is not determined by who sees it. It is determined by who you are when no one is watching, when there are no cameras and no contracts and no envelopes on the table, and when the moment comes, as it always does, for every one of us, for the full truth to step into the light, may you be ready, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the calm, unshakable clarity of someone who already knew.